When I first met you, I knew you from deal sourcing. So talk to me, how's the deal sourcing industry been, in your opinion, from when you started to how it is now?
I say it's definitely changed a lot. I feel like in deal sourcing, you can never kind of have a same strategy. I feel like you always have to constantly adapt to the market. I'd rather sack off the job and do this full time as opposed to keep the job, keep this money and then build a rent.
Out of all the strategies, what would you say is the most overrated and what would you say is the most underrated strategy?
The most overrated strategy is supported living, I'd say. So I've witnessed so many more companies go down that route and they can't pay the rent. They go bust after 6 months and there's just so much headache with them. So I would say that's definitely the most overrated.
Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm filming a podcast with my guy Chris. Now Chris has been in the property game for 8 years, specialising in deal sourcing, specialising in social housing and supported living. So I thought it'd be good to get a chat, to have a conversation with him and learn more about what's really happened in the UK, what's really happened with deal sourcing industry. So yeah, man, Chris, thank you for coming, bro.
No, thanks for having me, man. Appreciate it.
Cool, man. So yeah, let me get straight into it, bro. Obviously, when I first met you, I knew you from deal sourcing. So talk to me, how's the deal sourcing industry been, in your opinion, from when you started to how it is now?
I say it's definitely changed a lot. I feel like in deal sourcing, you can never kind of have a same strategy. I feel like you always have to constantly adapt to the market because the market plays a big factor in if you're going to sell deals or not. So when I initially started deal sourcing, we was doing rent to rent for private investors. For me personally, that was kind of a long route because I felt like a lot of investors became super picky with what they want. They will give you a description, you'll find what you'd find their description, and then all of a sudden there's another 20 other things that they didn't mention. So we kind of went from that and went into company lets, and that was more for supported living.
Okay.
And we got into that through a landlord that we met. He had a HMO which was in my eyes, severely overpriced, and he was very quick to say, I'm looking for this sort of tenant group. Yeah. So we done a bit of research on that tenant group, obviously talked to our network we had at the time. A few of them were part of that tenant group, and then, so it kind of grew from there. So we've done that for about 1.5 years. And then again, market changed, things slowed down again. And then next thing was, it was, social housing, temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation. That was sort of the next thing. And then again, went back to our network. There was a few providers we already had that operating that model. So obviously started from there, and then things severely took off way beyond we could imagine.
We're going to go into that later. We're going to go
and then
say that. But you see, okay, cool. So you started with deal sourcing. Why did you start off with deal sourcing, and why didn't you go to deal sourcing buy to lets or deal sourcing other strategies? Why was it kind of rent to rent that you started with?
So initially we actually started because we wanted to get involved in rent to rent ourselves, but we didn't have no money when we started. So we got told about deal sourcing, do the deal, get the cash. So our aim was to source a few deals to make enough capital to then take on our first rent to rent. That was the initial plan. Yeah. And then I'll be honest, I never really was the biggest fan of the job I was in. Neither was my business partner. So after selling a few deals, it was extra money in the kitty. Yeah. And then we started selling a few more deals to the point where it was we're practically making what we're making at our jobs now. Yeah. I'd rather sack off the job and do this full time as opposed to keep the job, keep this money and then build a rent to rent. So that's sort of how it just went straight into more full-time deal sourcing.
That makes sense.
But it wasn't the initial plan.
That makes sense. So cool. So it went deal sourcing, then from deal sourcing, then social housing and supported living. Now, how did you actually get into that? Because I know there's a lot of people who, it's like a buzzword, social housing, supported living, supported living. There's a lot of people who actually want to get into that strategy. So how did you actually get into that strategy?
Yeah. So with the supported living, so the similar story, it was a HMO landlord that we got from a Facebook ad. Okay. And like I said, at the time, his price that he wanted was something ridiculous. We've never done that sort of price. It was a 13-bed house, and I think he wanted 10 grand or whatever. At that point, I was like, who's going to pay 10 grand rent on a property? And I'd done so many viewings for him. I think we went back, the property was in near Wembley size. We went back and forth for about 10, 15 times with different clients. And they all was at the same sort of ball mark. They were all the 5, 6K mark, and he wasn't budging. And then in the end, he was like, no, I'm looking for this type of tenant group, referring to supported living. So we was like, what's that? We've never heard of that before. So obviously that's when he explained to us what they are, what they do. So then we obviously done a bit of research ourselves, and then kind of just put a broadcast message out to our client group to say, we're looking for providers who do supported living, have available property for you. And then all of a sudden, that's when we had like 2 or 3 people pop up to say like, oh yeah, this is what we do. So then obviously naturally we just jumped on calls with them and just kind of found out more like, how does it work? What do you look for? Any requirements? Stuff like that.
No, that makes
and
sense.
Then it started to build that way. So that's how we got into supported living. And then with social housing, it was similar. It was a very similar circumstance. It was the supported living market was sort of slowing down.
Interesting.
And we just kind of needed like, we weren't selling deals. We needed a new way out.
Yeah.
And to be honest, at that point, I was going to quit the business completely because I didn't think there was a way out.
And how many years ago was this?
This would have been in end of 2022, start of 2023.
Okay.
So I was actually going to quit the business because we just weren't selling anything anymore.
Yeah.
I was finding it so hard. And then one of our providers who we had down as a HMO client, I think we'd done one HMO deal with them, but it was basically like a 4-bed without a HMO license. So we started thinking, oh, like we thought you only could take properties that had a HMO license. How come you was able to take this 4-bed without a license?
Yeah.
And that's when they explained, you do know our main model is actually taking on 1 bed, 2 beds, 3 beds, and 4. So it was like, oh, but doing what with them? And then that's when they said temporary accommodation. So it was like, oh, okay, cool. Like we can find that because for us, it's a lot easier to find a studio, a 2-bed and a 3-bed than it is to find a 6-bed ready-made HMO with the license, with the compliance. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
So then we changed our model to that. And honestly, it started from the first month they told us that, we done like 7 deals in that month 1. Then month 2 was like 13 deals. Then month 3 was like 15 deals. And then I quit my job again.
Wow.
Then I went back to doing it full time. And then that's when it was like, right, cool. This is a winning model here. Like we're focusing, doubling down now on social housing.
So you see, social housing, there are so many kind of like niches with social housing. So first of all, explain the difference between social housing and supported living.
Yeah.
And also temporary accommodation, if there's a difference, just so people know.
So in terms of social housing, you're mainly dealing with single-let units, and it tends to be for families, ideally, usually people on some form of like a government councilship. So that could be asylum seekers, that could be temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation, hotel stays, relocations, anything to do with that sort.
Okay.
And they're only focusing on 1 bed up to 4 beds.
Okay.
Then supported living HMO is basically residential care.
Okay.
And they need a larger facility with a lot of different rooms and whatnot, because they're going to be using it for residential care for vulnerable adults.
Okay.
Or they could be using it for residential care for vulnerable children. So children might not necessarily mean your 3-4-year-olds. It's just anyone under the age of 18 years old.
Okay,
they're
cool.
classed as children.
Cool.
So that's like the 2 main difference between social housing and supported living.
That makes sense. So in your opinion, what would you say is more lucrative to get into?
As a deal sourcer or as like a provider?
I'll say both. And the reason why I ask is because I feel like from the outside, there is such a buzzword with social housing and supported living. Now, obviously, since I met you, I've known quite a bit, obviously, by being a good friendship with you. But for me, from the outside, I see a lot of people wanting to open their own supported living business because they hear, open a children's home, you can make 30K a month or whatever, you can make this. So there's such a buzzword of supported living. But is that actually the case? Are people really making that much money? And compare it to social housing, can you really make as much money as supported living?
So the answer to your first question in regards to supported living, are people making that kind of money? The answer is, in short, yes. Is it as simple as easy as how you're saying or how it's come across? Absolutely not. So majority of supported living companies actually don't make money, are actually losing money, and actually can never afford to pay the rent. That's the harsh reality, because a lot of these supported living companies, they're actually ran by nurses or healthcare professionals who they don't have property education, they've got healthcare background. So they don't really understand the property side of things. Now, the ones who are making that kind of income that you're speaking about, they're very, very small niche, and they're very particular specialists in their field. So that could be people who, there's something called, basically the more vulnerable the tenant is, and the more staff to tenant ratio you need, then it's the more money you're going to earn from supported living, because the risk is deemed a lot higher. So for example, you might have something called a 5-to-1 ratio, which means you have 1 tenant, but at all times you need 5 staff members for that 1 tenant, because maybe that tenant, if you leave them alone for a second, they're going to commit suicide or they're going to run out and endanger someone, so they have to be looked after. That sort of risk and that sort of tenant, you are probably going to be looking at 10, 20, 30 grand a week
Wow.
for looking after a tenant like that. But then what people don't see is it's not, let's call it 10 grand a week. Yeah. It doesn't mean that supported living companies making £40,000 a month and they can pay you 10 grand in rent. No. The amount of outgoings they have on their head is ridiculous. So first of all, you've got 5 full-time staff they need to pay out of that money.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be cheap to pay a high-risk staff dealing with high-risk tenants.
True.
So let's say on average you're paying all your staff members, let's say just 2.5 grand each. 2, 5, 2, 5, 7, 5, 10, 12,000. So 12,500 has already gone out on staff costs. True. Then obviously you've got to have your cameras set up, your insurances. Obviously you're supplying the food, the electric, but all of these other outgoings. Then on top of that, you've got like the registration fees, like with Ofsted and with the CQC. So there's a lot of outgoings
that's mad.
As well. But they are still making like a good, healthy income. But I feel like that's where the misperception comes in. A lot of landlord hears maybe one scenario of maybe their friends managed to find a tenant group like that and just assume it's the same across the board when that's a very rarity to get that.
That's crazy.
Does that make sense?
That's mad. And so compare that to social housing, would you say, because again, when I kind of got into social housing, it did feel easier. And I know things changed drastically with the council, which we're going to touch on shortly, but it seemed very easy. You know, there's so many companies offering like guaranteed rent schemes, give the property here, you give it to the council tenant. So would you say that one is much easier, and can you make much more money from that?
What I've realized about social housing is very decisive on the market. That's what I've realized about it. So there's so many different models when it comes to social housing. I think the one that is probably the most paid, should we say, would probably be those that maybe work with maybe like the asylum seekers. Those that kind of work from the Ministry of Justice, the MOJ.
Heard them.
Again, because it's high risk. So anything that's high risk, obviously it pays more, but there's a lot more outgoings, there's a lot more structure, there's a lot more things required for it. They're probably the ones that I'd say probably have the more consistent basis, but again, it's so hard to even get those sort of contracts into your homes because they have so much criteria. I think we tried one when I sent you the form.
But
and it's like, it can't be a certain miles from the park, it can't be a certain distance from a school, it can't be, there's just so many criteria that it's very hard to scale that sort of model up. But that's obviously, again, high risk, high reward. In regards to like temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation, things like that. The model is very simple. You know, they rent it on a guaranteed rent, give it to a family who's coming from the council. It's very simple, but their price is very dictative on the market. So when the market is great and they have a good budget, then absolutely fantastic for the landlords, fantastic for like private investors. But when the budget is tight, when the budget is concealed and the market is low or whatever changes, then it becomes really difficult because you're now in a situation where you're in a competitive market with private residential clients who can offer more or offer the same or offer deposits. And then it's like, it's a bit harder
it's true
to want to go down that route.
True. So from your experience in 8 years that you've been in property, out of all the strategies, what would you say is the most overrated and what would you say is the most underrated strategy?
The most overrated strategy is supported living, I'd say. Because like I said, I've witnessed so many more companies go down that route and they can't pay the rent. They go bust after 6 months and there's just so much headache with them. And I've seen a bigger pot of supported living companies fail than I have with the ones who succeed. And I work with a few that succeed, and like the way they operate the business compared to the others who just get in the game is like two completely different full playing fields.
Crazy, man.
So I would say that's definitely the most overrated because people think they can just pay outrageous rents and they can charge whatever they want for it, and they're gonna be making, you know, £10,000 a week, so it should be all right. And it's like there's so much more that goes on the background. Where I'll tell you one thing that a lot of people don't know, even people that get into supported living don't know. A lot of the times when they take on a property, especially if they're newly registered, they have to have a property in their name to even submit for an Ofsted or a CQC license, which means that they have to take on the property first, submit for their license, and then wait to get the license approved before they might even get their first referral. That whole process from when they've paid the rent and deposit on day one to when they actually can get their first referral a lot of the time it's after 8-9 months in.
Wow.
A lot of companies can't last 8-9
Yeah,
months in,
yeah,
and they've already
true.
committed to £6,000 a month rent.
Yeah.
But you're going to do that for 8 months with no income coming in, no
Wow.
guarantees of income. Some companies don't even get their first role till after a year.
Yeah, that's
So the
mad.
ones that really know what they're doing, they have that buffer of money ready
That's
there
crazy,
to
man.
invest in a new home, and they know how long it's going to take. Those who are new, they don't understand that part, and that's why I see after 6 months to handing it back, after 4 months to handing it back.
That's mad. Oh, that's crazy. So cool. So you said underrated. Which one was most underrated strategy?
So the underrated strategy, supported living.
You said no. You said overrated.
Overrated strategy,
Overrated
yeah,
support
sorry.
living. Which is underrated?
Underrated strategy. This one's hard, you know, and again, I think it's all based on the market, but
Yeah,
I'd
yeah.
probably say the most underrated, I would probably have to say, I'm torn between, I'd say Airbnb, and I'm still going to say social housing, but for completely different reasons.
Okay, why?
So the reason I say Airbnb is because Airbnb currently, as it stands, obviously is obviously the most unregulated market, which means you have scope to be as creative as you can be, which means there's a lot of property opportunities that may come up and you can use it in a creative angle that you can't use it with any other model, which I think gives you a leeway to obviously take on more properties. The only thing I don't like about Airbnb is, unless obviously you know what you're doing, is the risk involved of you don't exactly know how much you're going to make every month because it depends on the bookings. But in terms of creativity, I'd say Airbnb. But the reason I still go with social housing is, even though the rates might fluctuate, it's so once you get the rates right, whatever the rates are, whether they're £2,000 a month, whether it's £1,000 a month, whether it's £3,000, whatever. Once you get the rates right, it's such a scalable model. And a lot of people who still till today who purchases like apartments or purchases like blocks or buildings, their go-to is getting a social housing contract in place for like the rental yield and the ROIs and things like that as well, because it's just the most consistent and scalable model where okay, whatever the price is, I just know if it's that price, it's that price. That's it, and it's just scalable. Whereas the only thing I don't like about it is it's too dependent on the market. So if the market says no, then all of a sudden the rates go. If the market says yes, then all of a sudden the rates go like that. And that's the only thing I don't like about it.
And you see this is where the problem lies. 'Cause I've had so much crazy experience with these like social housing companies. And even though it can be reliable in terms of getting consistent income, I don't actually believe that, because what you said in terms of somebody could take a house and know that it's going to be guaranteed. But as we've seen, like with the budget cuts, like they've now had to either give back properties or they've had to reduce the rate drastically. One of the companies that we know, they've tried to drop my rate by like £700. Like one of my properties, I was making like 1.3 profit at one point, and then they dropped it, and they said next, it was like 300, 400 profit. Another company, they dropped it by 400. Now I'm not making any profit. I had to give it back. So I feel like there still is a large amount of risk. And now touching on that, why do you think that is? Like, why has there been so much change between like what social housing companies can really offer like tenants or clients?
Where there's two, from my research and my knowledge, there's I think 2 or 3 major players in this. The first one is every year the councils over exceed the housing budget. It's been a year-on-year thing. It's not nothing new. And I think where a lot of the budget goes towards is temporary accommodation. Now, not necessarily temporary accommodation model, but more so like the in-between. So like your hotel stays, your short-term accommodation stays. A lot of nightly rates have been flooding in towards that direction, where when the budget, when the council's auditing comes through, there's you can see very clearly that they're overspending a lot on those temporary transitions. So like the relocating transitions. So not when they've placed someone in like a house that they're going to stay in for 5-6 years. Just that in between part, they might be moving someone from one house to another, or that in between part, like they've overspent big time. And I think obviously since Labour came to party last year in November, that was one of the things they tried to cut out. Like when they're not spending that kind of money anymore, so they're trying to reduce everything. Secondly, is for like the regular residential people. So a lot of people at the moment can't even just simply move out their parents' house and just rent normally, because they can't compete with the rental that a company can provide a landlord. So across the country, I think this is now the average person that now moves out, I think it's around 35 now.
Okay.
So it's considerably gone a lot higher than when it was back in like the 70s or 80s,
Yeah.
etc. And one of the main problems of that is the competition. Like right now, you're asking, let's say, regular residential people to pay, let's say, I don't know, £2,000 for a 2-bed.
Yeah.
But at its pomp, a company that can come in and offer 2,400. Where's the landlord really going to go? It's going to go down there in terms of that's. I'm not saying this is my opinion.
Yeah,
I'm saying this is how it's looked upon.
Okay.
So,
Fair enough.
So this is how it's looked upon. So then another thing that now they're trying to change is they're trying to get all the rates reduced back. So then it's competitive for all. So then it gives more people a chance to get on the ladder and be able to rent and things like that, and kind of keep things at a balanced level and not overly inflate prices. And the third thing is, I think they just need, across the whole of the UK, I think they just need rents to start either going stable or reducing, because at this rate, the way rents are constantly rising and rising and rising, you already have a problem with a lot of people can't even afford to get onto the property ladder in terms of purchasing because of the gap on how expensive it is. But now you're seeing the rise when it comes to rents as well, and then it's creating another problem. A lot of regular people, that I think there was something in the newspaper about a couple together earned over 100,000, and they had to register on the council list to try to get a property because it was just so competitive and they just weren't getting anything. Not because they can't afford it, but basically because they're always outbidded. It's always someone else that can pay more. There's always another company or something that can pay more. So you have a lot of people like that who are well within their affordability to rent or to buy, but they don't get the opportunity to. So the council list is now just getting flooded with a lot of people who are not necessarily in a position where they need the help. It's more that they just like, well, we can't do it ourselves. So it's kind of like we have nowhere else to go. We have to kind of go to the council to help us out.
That's crazy.
So I think it's relieving all of that pressure together is what they're trying to do. So I think that has a major impact on like the rates. And I think the budgets came out, and since 2023, I think the budget's now has been slashed like almost half now than when it was in 2023. So
that's crazy,
the budget for it is getting smaller and smaller.